Louis Vuitton is one of the most prestigious brands in the world, and even if you can't afford anything from them, we all know this brand and many of us appreciate it. Founded almost 200 years ago by a very talented French trunk maker, unsurprisingly named Louis Vuitton, today it's a globally recognized multinational corporation generating billions of dollars in revenue worldwide. But for a very long time, the brand was a small Parisian business run by the Vuitton family, passed down from father to son or to family members until the arrival of a man, or rather a ruthless predator. Bernard Arnault. How did this man, who was completely unrelated to the Vuitton family, manage to take over this company? It's an incredible story of betrayal, low blows, and above all, genius moves. So, let me tell you how the richest man in France managed to snatch Louis Vuitton from the Vuitton family hands.
Good morning!
Today, we're going to be talking about the biggest ripoff in the world of luxury textiles, the story of Bernard Arnault, aka the Wolf in Cashmere. And even though when you look at his face, he seems more like Principal Mackey from South Park than a dangerous predator, he's the guy behind several big moves in the luxury business, but also some major betrayals. And betrayal is like drugs.
Because drugs are bad, okay?
In just a few years, he managed to snatch up almost all the major French luxury brands. And obviously, he wasn't very fair during all these years. However, he was very, very sharp and above all, very cunning. Today, Bernard Arnault is the richest man in France by quite a bit, with his estimated fortune being over $100 billion. The majority of his fortune is due to his shares in the company he's now CEO of, LVMH, a company he managed to take from the Vuitton family in a very shady manner. To understand how he got there, we'll need to give you guys some context. His story is not an American success story, where he started from the bottom before reaching wealth. Nope, he always had a very comfortable life. He wasn't born a billionaire, but don't worry, he still started out as a millionaire. The story begins with his father's public works company, Savenel, a small business in the provinces where Bernard Arnault began his career. Before you know it, the torch was passed down to Arnault, a graduate of Polytechnique, a very prestigious school in France, and very skilled in business. His father was quite calm about the management of Savenel, which was renamed Farinel a few years later by Bernard Arnault. Up until then, his focus had been on real estate. He was quite far from the world of luxury and fashion, and he probably never would have been interested in it if the Boussac group hadn't gone bankrupt in the 1980s. The Boussac group was a large group mostly owned by the French state, which owned several brands including Conforama, which is kind of like IKEA, Le Bon Marché, a mall that's aiming towards luxurious stuff, and especially the luxury ready-to-wear brand Christian Dior, which attracted the attention of a bunch of investors. But despite the very strong brands in the Boussac group, they also had a number of underperforming brands that cost a lot of money. The French state was no longer able to manage the group, which was losing millions of dollars each year, so they decided to sell it to investors who would know how to revive Boussac while minimizing the layoffs of thousands of employees in the group. The idea was to reduce monetary losses for the state, but also to find a buyer who could or even had to save as many jobs as possible and avoid layoffs. And that's where Bernard comes in with his company Farinel and a lot of nice promises. The group probably found a buyer in Farinel, which is better known for its investments in leisure real estate, as they say. But the problem was that at the time, Bernard Arnault's fortune was far less than it is today, and if you adjust for inflation, he must have had a fortune of around 25 million euros, which was way far from what he needed to buy the bankrupt group. So he teamed up with banks and other partners to buy Boussac, and the French government accepted his offer because they thought it would keep all their group's bonds and, most importantly, over 12,000 jobs as promised in their agreement. The reality was quite different, and he betrayed the government, the employees, and his own business partners who helped him invest in this project. From the beginning, he had a diabolical plan in mind, and it was put into action sometime after the acquisition of the group, where he borrowed a lot of money from Crédit Lyonnais to secretly buy shares of Boussac and become the majority shareholder. He was now in charge of the group, and he got rid of everyone. He began to lay off a lot more people than expected. There were only 8,700 employees left, compared to the promised 12,200, and the real reason he bought the group was solely to acquire the Dior brand. So, despite the agreement with the government, he also got rid of all the group's brands that didn't interest him. He sold everything to keep Dior and Le Bon Marché, the two most profitable businesses he was able to develop over the years. And despite the con and huge scandal it created, he wasn't worried, probably thanks to his influence and networks that allowed him to do pretty much what he wants. And he lived his life as a businessman peacefully on the side. On On the other side of things, Louis Vuitton wasn't doing so great. They were totally lost. The brand was almost about to die, and for the first time, they decided to call upon a man who was not a descendant of the Vuitton family to run the company. And you guessed it, that man was absolutely not Bernard Arnault, who was not yet circling around Louis Vuitton at the time, but Henri Racamier, the husband of one of Louis Vuitton's granddaughters. And even though he was partly responsible for the Vuitton family losing the company, he was also one of the best managers for the brand. He implemented many strategies that are still used today. It was him who decided to sell Louis Vuitton products exclusively in Louis Vuitton boutiques. It was him who understood the importance of exporting to the Asian market. It was also him who initiated several iconic marketing campaigns, and him who succeeded in transforming this small dying brand into an essential luxury brand by multiplying the company's turnover by 30. And it was during this period, aiming to go even further into luxury and offering an unparalleled experience to its customers, that the Louis Vuitton family teamed up with the Moët Hennessy, renowned for their luxury champagne, and their union created LVMH. But if everything was going so well for Louis Vuitton, what was Bernard Arnault doing during this story? Well, it was Henri Racamier, the new leader of Louis Vuitton, who called him for help, and it wasn't to assist him in strategic decisions, but the crafty Bernard already had a reputation as a professional swindler, and Henri Racamier needed Bernard Arnault's help to trick Alain Chevalier, the leader of Moët Hennessy, who he didn't get along too well, and the goal was to conspire together to allow the leader of Louis Vuitton to become the majority shareholder of the group and run LVMH alone. Basically, he was convinced that Bernard Arnault would be his ally against Alain Chevalier. He was called to become a shareholder of LVMH, but the reality was quite different, since he took advantage of the disagreement between the two men to secretly plot on both sides. First, pretending to help Henri Racamier recover the company, and then secretly talking to Alain Chevalier to scrape even more shares from both sides. But despite these secret agreements with the two rival allies, he was still far from being the majority shareholder. So he did something quite ballsy. He once again turned to Crédit Lyonnais to finance a new operation to once again trick his partners. He did an OPA, which is basically a public offer addressed to all the people in the world who own LVMH shares, to offer to buy back their shares. And in no time, and after spending millions, he had accumulated enough shares to become the new majority shareholder, screwing absolutely everyone without them noticing. It was the comeuppance for Henri Racamier. He brought the wolf into the sheepfold and got eaten up.
And just like that, I left everything. I dropped out of high school. See ya! I said goodbye to my girlfriend. See ya! And I left my family. See ya!
There it is. We're at the end of the 80s, and Arnault had officially become the captain of the ship. He made a clean sweep, and the majority of the members of the Vuitton family decided to resign after figuring out the huge plot and that they could do absolutely nothing to contest Bernard Arnault's takeover legally. He now had the LVMH group, where he added the Christian Dior brand that he had owned since the acquisition of the Boussac group. And then he went on to acquire other luxury brands like Celine, Berluti, Kenzo, and so on. He was buying up all the luxury fashion brands to expand his catalog. And as a little anecdote, Bernard Arnault didn't always come out on top. In the 2000s, he tried to buy Gucci by acquiring more than 30% of the company's shares. But Gucci's executives didn't want him to become the majority shareholder. So they told him, "Don't worry, bro. We'll sell you the brand. Let's meet and talk about it." Meanwhile, they were scheming behind his back to let François Pinault take over and buy Gucci. François Pinault is the CEO of Kering, LVMH's main competitor, which owns brands like Gucci, Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, and used to own Puma not too long ago. After experiencing the same treatment that he usually inflicts on others, Arnault had had it with Kering and Gucci. He made a big fuss and even took the matter to court.
Are you serious right now, bro?
This case pushed LVMH and Kering to engage in a luxury war and buy even more brands, sometimes at ridiculously high prices. This ego fight is one of the reasons why almost all of the luxury brands are owned by two huge businesses. The other reason is because luxury fashion makes an unbelievable amount of money. Bernard Arnault is now the richest man in the world, largely thanks to his somewhat shady dealings. He continued to buy LVMH shares throughout the rest of his life and now owns nearly 50% of the group's shares, effectively locking it in his control. He made sure that LVMH would never again leave the Arnault family's hands, and has already planned which of his sons will take over the business once he retires. That's the dark side of Bernard Arnault in a nutshell. His life was like a game of Agario. He started with his dad's small business and then gobbled up larger and larger companies, with money he didn't even have, borrowing astronomical sums and betraying his partners. No one saw it coming. Well played, Mr. Arnault. He's obviously very good at what he does, but he's also seen as a pretty devious guy by some people, and has built his wealth on lies, betrayal, trail and on the back of the French state. When you think about it, his dad's main client was the French state, and then he snatched up a company that the state had basically financed, naively thinking that it would save jobs. In reality, his rise was basically sponsored by France, only for him to try every conceivable trick to avoid paying taxes to them.
How dare you?
Oh Lord, I was in that Dodge first, trying to dodge chase. If you know, you know, I was speed race. I'm just trying to mosh pit, I'm just trying to mosh pit, trying to start a mosh pit, trying to jump off in the pit, like deodorant.